From the shadows of a filthy prison cell to the golden throne of an empire, this is not a tale of noble birth, but of cunning, betrayal, and destiny. This is the forgotten saga of the man Rome never expected to rule. The air inside the prison was thick with the stench of sweat, damp stone, and human despair. Narrow shafts of light struggled through barred openings high above, barely illuminating the rows of chained men. Among them sat Marcus Cassianius Latinius Postumus, once a commander of men, now reduced to a number in Rome's forgotten files. His fall from power had been swift, a victim of political intrigue during one of the empire's most unstable periods. In the mid-3rd century AD, the Roman world was on the brink of collapse. Emperors rose and fell with alarming speed, often surviving only months before being assassinated or overthrown. Civil wars flared between rival generals, while barbarian invasions battered the borders. Economic instability, rampant inflation, and military discontent gnawed at the empire's strength. It was an age historians now call the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when loyalty was fleeting and survival demanded both cunning and strength. Postumus had been no ordinary officer, born in the provinces, likely in Gaul or Germania. He rose through the ranks by sheer ability. His military campaigns on the Rhine frontier earned him respect among the legions. Yet in Rome's political arena, merit was rarely enough. Rivalries with other commanders, particularly those favored by the central imperial court, eventually placed a target on his back. In an empire where suspicion was as lethal as any blade, accusations, whether true or false, could mean the end. Now confined in a cell, Postumus watched the slow decay of the empire he had served. He listened to the whispers of guards and fellow prisoners, news of emperors murdered, armies defecting, provinces slipping from control. The power he once held had been stripped away, but not his will. In a world ruled by shifting allegiances and sudden opportunity, chains were only temporary for those who understood the game of power. Long before he would wear the imperial purple, Postumus understood that survival in Rome was not just a matter of strength, it was a matter of timing. And in the chaos outside these walls, time itself was preparing the opening that would change his fate. By the middle of the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire was a realm in perpetual crisis. Its borders stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the sands of Mesopotamia, yet that vast reach had become a liability. The legions, once Rome's unshakable shield, were scattered thin across thousands of miles, defending against a relentless wave of threats. Goths pressing into the Balkans, Alemanni raiding deep into Gaul, Sassanid forces striking at the eastern provinces. In Rome itself, stability had all but vanished. Emperors no longer ruled for decades. Some measured their reigns in mere months. Between 235 and 284 AD, more than 20 emperors would claim the purple, many meeting violent ends at the hands of their own soldiers. Civil wars erupted between rival generals, each backed by legions loyal not to the empire, but to the promise of reward. Economic collapse deepened the instability. Continuous warfare drained the treasury, while debasement of the currency drove inflation to ruinous levels. Trade routes faltered, agricultural production suffered, and cities strained to feed their populations. Famine and plague swept through provinces already reeling from invasion. In such an environment, the machinery of imperial power became fragile. The Senate, once a center of authority, was little more than a ceremonial body. Real power rested with whoever commanded the most loyal troops at the most critical moment. In this ruthless climate, legitimacy was less about lawful succession and more about immediate control. It was in this world, a world where emperors could be made and unmade by a single army's decision, that extraordinary shifts in fortune became possible. A man's past, whether as a governor, a general, or even a prisoner, mattered less than his ability to rally soldiers to his cause. In the chaos of the crisis of the 3rd century, the unimaginable became reality. In the volatile world of the 3rd century Roman Empire, loyalty was rarely permanent. Postumus, once a trusted commander along the Rhine frontier, had built his reputation through decisive victories against Germanic tribes and his ability to maintain discipline among the legions. His success brought him influence, but in an empire plagued by political paranoia, influence could be as dangerous as open rebellion. The exact chain of events leading to his imprisonment remains obscured by conflicting accounts, but the pattern was familiar. A rival, possibly aligned with the imperial court in Rome, accused Postumus of disloyalty, perhaps of conspiring to claim power for himself. In the tense climate of the crisis of the 3rd century, such accusations rarely required proof. A single rumor could carry the weight of a sentence. For Postumus, the blow was swift. Stripped of command, he was taken into custody under the pretext of safeguarding the empire from treachery. His legions, scattered along the frontier, were unable or unwilling to intervene. Men who had once pledged their loyalty kept their distance, unwilling to risk sharing his fate. Imprisonment in the Roman world was not designed for rehabilitation. It was a tool, a place to remove threats quietly, without the spectacle of public execution. For Postumus, it meant confinement in harsh, cramped conditions, cut off from the politics and battles that had defined his life. He would have heard of former allies securing their own positions, perhaps even benefiting from his absence. Isolation stripped away the trappings of his former rank, but it also provided clarity. Surrounded by the shadows of betrayal, Postumus was left with one undeniable truth. Survival in Rome depended not on loyalty or service, but on seizing opportunity when it appeared. And beyond those prison walls, opportunity was already taking shape. In 260 AD, the Roman Empire suffered a catastrophic blow. Emperor Valerian, leading a campaign against the Sassanid Persians, was captured alive at the Battle of Edessa. The turning point came with his swift military actions against the Germanic incursions. In a matter of months, Postumus drove back raiders who had penetrated deep into Roman territory, restoring critical defenses along the Rhine. These victories were more than strategic wins. They silenced the doubters who saw him as a usurper and convinced many that Rome's western provinces could not wait for orders from Gallienus. By late 260 AD, the soldiers and provincial leaders proclaimed Postumus emperor of what would come to be known as the Gallic Empire, a breakaway realm encompassing Gaul, Germania, Britannia, and Hispania. The transformation was complete when he donned the imperial purple, the ultimate symbol of Roman authority. What had begun in chains ended with the coronation of a man who now stood as master of the West. Once secure on the throne of the Gallic Empire, Postumus faced the daunting task of transforming a collection of vulnerable frontier provinces into a stable, functioning state. His first priority was military reform. The Rhine frontier remained under constant pressure from Germanic incursions, and he reorganized the legions to operate with greater speed and autonomy. Fortifications along the river were strengthened, supply lines restored, and veteran officers placed in key positions to ensure discipline and loyalty. Economic stability was equally critical. Years of war had disrupted trade and drained local treasuries. Postumus reformed the provincial tax system to prioritize the needs of the frontier, redirecting resources to fund both defense and civic rebuilding. He issued new coinage from mints in Trier and Cologne, improving monetary circulation and reinforcing his authority through the imagery of imperial legitimacy. In matters of law, Postumus sought to project fairness while maintaining firm control. Local governance was encouraged, with city councils retaining a measure of autonomy under his oversight. At the same time, dissent was dealt with swiftly. Governors and commanders suspected of disloyalty were removed or executed, a reminder that his tolerance had limits. This balance of reward and punishment was essential to holding together a realm separated from Rome. But leadership in this fractured empire came at a personal cost. Postumus lived under the constant threat of assassination, knowing that many of his predecessors in the Roman world had fallen to conspiracies within their own ranks. Decisions had to be made quickly, often without the benefit of reliable information, and the weight of maintaining both military readiness and civil order left little room for rest. In an age when power was as fragile as the man who held it, Postumus understood that survival depended on relentless vigilance. By 267 CE, Postumus's authority faced its greatest tests. Along the northern frontier, the Alemanni and Franks pressed against the Rhine, seeking to exploit any lapse in Roman vigilance. At the same time, within the Gallic Empire, ambitious governors and military commanders saw opportunities to challenge his rule. Postumus responded with a calculated mix of speed and severity. When Frankish raiders breached the frontier, he personally directed counteroffensives that pushed them back across the river. His forces did not simply repel invaders, they pursued them into their own territories, sending a message that the Gallic Empire would meet force with overwhelming retaliation. Yet the greater danger often came from within. In Hispania, dissenting commanders tested his reach, refusing tax shipments and questioning his legitimacy. Postumus acted decisively, cutting supply routes, isolating rebellious garrisons, and replacing hesitant officers with proven loyalists. The stability of his realm depended on projecting both military strength and political control, even if it meant eliminating potential rivals before they acted. These measures secured his borders and preserved his authority, but they also came with a moral cost. To supporters, Postumus was a protector of the provinces, a leader who had restored security and prosperity. To his enemies, and even some within his own court, he was a usurper who ruled through calculated fear. In the fractured world of the 3rd century, survival as emperor often required choices that blurred the line between heroism and tyranny, and Postumus walked that line with deliberate precision. By the late years of Postumus's reign, the weight of power pressed harder than any chain he had worn in captivity. The Gallic Empire, though stable on the surface, seethed beneath with political ambition and quiet resentment. Provincial governors who had once been allies now measured their own strength against his. Officers whispered in camps, their loyalty shifting with the promise of advancement. Assassination attempts became a constant hazard. At least twice, conspiracies reached the highest levels of his court, forcing him to remove trusted advisors without public explanation. His once tight circle of confidence thinned to a handful of men whose loyalty could never be fully proven. Every meeting, every message carried the potential for treachery. Shifting alliances in the provinces added to the strain. Leaders in Germania and Britannia offered support 1 month, only to withhold troops or taxes the next. Postumus's position demanded ruthless decisiveness. Each suspected betrayal met with swift removal or exile, but every purge chipped away at trust, leaving him more isolated at the top of his empire. The constant vigilance wore on him. Years of ruling in a fractured age demanded not only military acumen, but also the mental endurance to live surrounded by shadows. For Postumus, survival meant suspecting everyone, until suspicion became the only certainty. In 269 CE, the chain of events that would end Postumus's reign began within his own army. A revolt broke out under Laelianus, one of his senior commanders, in the city of Mainz. Postumus moved quickly, crushing the rebellion within weeks, a display of efficiency that reaffirmed his control. But in the aftermath, he made a decision that sealed his fate. He refused to allow his troops to sack the captured city, denying them the spoils of victory. To the weary soldiers who had fought fiercely, it was a betrayal of their expectations. Discipline, in this moment, outweighed popularity, but it cost him the loyalty of men who had followed him for years. The resentment flared into violence. In the streets of Mainz, a mob of his own soldiers turned on him. No foreign army, no rival emperor, delivered the final blow. It came from those who had once sworn to protect him. His death marked the abrupt end of a reign that had risen from obscurity to challenge the power of Rome itself. Postumus had carved an empire from the chaos of the 3rd century, defending it with skill and resolve. Yet the same iron discipline that built his rule also destroyed it. In the end, the man who had risen from nothing was undone not by his enemies at the gates, but by the hands within his own camp. In the centuries after his death, Postumus's name rarely appeared in Rome's official histories. To the Central Empire, he was a usurper, an ambitious provincial who fractured Roman unity. Yet in Gaul, Germania, and Britannia, he was remembered with a more complex lens. He had defended the provinces from constant Germanic incursions, stabilized their economies, and provided leadership at a time when Rome itself was collapsing into crisis. Archaeological finds, coins bearing his image, inscriptions honoring his victories, suggest that many saw him as a legitimate ruler. His reign became an example of the precarious balance between loyalty to the empire and the survival of the provinces. For some, he was a savior who protected them when Rome could not. For others, an opportunist who exploited chaos to seize power. His story offers enduring lessons that in politics, loyalty is fleeting. In war, discipline can be fatal. And in power, isolation is inevitable. Postumus rose from captivity to command an empire. Yet even at the height of his reign, surrounded by legions and riches, one question lingered: was the prisoner ever truly free?